provide live in real time for our clients and our alumni for their lifetime. So it's an opportunity to give support. The way that I think about it is it's a way of kind of hearing or immersing yourself in a certain kind of sensibility, because when you have a child that's struggling with mental health issues or addiction, it's hard to find a voice that gives you comfort, that gives you some kind of way to think about it that's helpful, that gives you support. And so that's what we hope these are. We hope these are an extra point of contact throughout our broadcast, and I'll mention this again at the end. Our broadcasts are also available via your podcast app for free for anybody. So those are public, but for typically these are reserved for current families and alumni families, but tonight we've decided to open up to the public. So welcome. Tonight's broadcast is on risk-taking behaviors. And so let me start with this introduction. The adolescent brain, and we think of that, Daniel Siegel talks about this being between 11 and 24. He's a renowned doctor from UCLA who's well known for his research on the brain. The adolescent brain is prone to risk-taking behavior. It requires more stimulation than the adult brain to trigger a sense of pleasure. The prefrontal cortex, which provides reasoning, is not fully formed until the mid-20s. Understanding these concepts can help the adolescent, of course, and when parents understand this, they may have a more compassionate and understanding and patient response to their child's behavior. So what I've been in love with lately is this idea of looking at human beings through the lens of psychology, through the lens of therapy. And when we look at human beings anywhere, in any context, through the lens of therapy, good and bad melt away, right and wrong melt away, and it becomes about healing and woundedness and growing. There's not a moral imperative in mental health. And one of the greatest difficulties in parenting or dealing with people that we love that are struggling is how we feel about them. And how we feel about them becomes, especially with our children, becomes their inner voice. It becomes how they tend to think about themselves. So when we meet them with impatience and frustration and even anxiety that we think is born out of love and care and concern for them, they can easily internalize that as something that's profoundly wrong with them. So this is just a shift of lens. Let's talk about the purposes of behavior, right? The purpose of risk-taking behavior. This could be drugs. This could be any kind of risky, exhilarating, dangerous, potentially self-harming behavior. What does it do? We always want to think about what are the benefits of it. It's really easy for any of us, even your children, to write an essay on why symptoms, mental health symptoms, and addiction symptoms are negative. That's not complicated. That doesn't take much insight. But what does really take insight, and what is scary for us as parents, because we're afraid that if we attribute some positiveness or some purpose in the behavior, that it will never go away, that we're emboldening it, and that we're allowing it or endorsing it. On the contrary, it really leads to the unraveling of the behavior when we understand in what context it makes sense. So, of course, pleasure. And I'll talk about the adolescent brain and why it's particularly prone to risk-taking behaviors to receive some kind of pleasure. The concept of primary gain and secondary gain is really important. Primary gain is anything I do that gives me a sense of pleasure or reduces anxiety. That's a primary gain. But secondary gain is the reinforcement I get from my environment. So think about something as simple as biting my nails, right? Biting my nails could be anxiety reducing, right? It focuses my energy, right? I have a project to work on. That's the primary gain. The secondary gain would be, in this case, maybe the attention that I get from my father or my mother, telling me to stop biting my nails. Maybe even if I'm frustrating them by this behavior, that secondary gain would be I'm getting back at them or expressing my anger kind of sideways, in a sideways kind of way. So primary gain is anxiety reduction, and secondary gain is the reinforcement that I get from my environment. Differentiation during adolescence becomes a priority. And what that means is it's important, fundamentally important, as an adolescent that I separate from you as my parent. It's the number one priority during that phase. Because if I don't, literally, when we look at the history of the species, I'm going to die. Right? If I don't develop my own ability to function without you, I'm going to die. And so there's this mechanism that comes into play during adolescence that says I have to separate from you. And so some do that better and more graceful than others, and some do that in a difficult way. And to the extent the parent is capable of supporting that, it can help. It's not the full equation by any means, but it can help with that process and to not take things personally along the way, right? It's normal for your child to care less about you in adolescence. It's normal for your child to start to value peers more than you, to not like you, right? It's really important for all of us that we develop resources so when our children go through adolescence, 11 to 24, that we're not requiring them to take care of us. We're taking care of ourselves. We allow for and support differentiation, still holding our boundaries, but allowing for that and seeing it through that lens. Escaping the traps of parental anxiety, right? There's this equation that is harmful and erroneous in our culture, that anxiety comes from love. It doesn't. There's no relationship necessarily to them. Anxiety is about capacity, and children require a lot of capacity. And children who have mental health, learning differences, right, challenges, children that are different from us, children that have addiction, they require more capacity. And so one way out of that is to rebel. One way out of that is to find ways in our environment as children, as adolescent children, to get our needs met somewhere else. Right? It's a way out, a way to push the parents away. A way to kind of, I'd rather fail the test dramatically than I would try to pass it and fail, right? That's something I'm just going to fail. I'm just going to do my worst version because I'd rather walk right into it than try and try and try to reduce my parents' anxiety, make them feel okay, and fail at it. It communicates possibly anger toward the parents. It's similar to those above that I've talked about, but if I do something risky, it can be an indirect way of expressing anger at my parents. In other words, what does a parent love the most? Their child. And so if I threaten that child, if I'm the child and I threaten that child, even if it's me, even if I'm threatening me, it's my way of the sticking out my proverbial middle finger at my parents. Because it's not safe, or I'm not able, or I don't have the tools or the wisdom, or the system doesn't support me expressing my anger directly at my parents. Or it just works for me. Distraction. I think one of the most profound things I learned as a young therapist is that when you change the conversation, when the conversation is focused on the symptoms, right? It's focused on the eating disorder or the smoking or the drinking. When you focus on it, it wins. It's accomplished in part its objective, which is to not talk about feelings, to not talk about the relationship, to not talk about what is real. And so, yes, we're going to pay attention to symptoms, and the more life-threatening they are, we're going to pay more attention to them. But we use those to find out what's going on. That's what happens in virtually all versions of therapy, especially therapy that focuses on the family as the identified patient instead of the individual. So the distraction is a win for the mental health, for the mental health symptom, excuse me. Connection, they seek for connection. There's very little required often by peers to fit in, right? So you gravitate toward peers that have no standards whatsoever, low standards, no standards whatsoever, and you find acceptance. That's really important if you live in a home where there's a lot of anxiety, where how you are, how you show up causes your parents to feel that kind of gasp of fear and anxiety. Immediately, that's a signal to you as a child that your parent is not safe. So you go to hang around people that say, oh, it's no big deal. Even if it is, of course, a very dangerous and very big deal. Attachment issues. I love this experiment. I love this experiment out of Columbia University where researchers took rats, baby rats, and they shocked them. And they paired the shock with a peppermint scent, the smell of a peppermint. And half of the rats were by themselves when they were shocked as babies, and the other half of them were nestling, cuddling with their mothers while they were shocked. Right? That's the only difference in the two groups. And then later on in life, they exposed these rats to mazes. Actually, they were mice, but it's the same principle. They exposed these rodents to mazes, and at the end of these mazes were different scents: citrus smells, pine smells, no smell, and peppermint smell. The rats that were shocked by themselves never went to the peppermint. Never. The rats that were shocked with their mothers present almost always went to the peppermint. And the idea illustrates that attachment trumps pain. Meaning that if the attachment style that we grow up in is conflictual, chaotic, there's addiction, right? If it's any of those things or whatever it is, we gravitate towards that. That's what we know. That's what our brain, it's a survival mechanism in our brain. We gravitate toward that because that's where the attachment was. That's why so many of us realize that the situations, circumstances we find ourselves in life, when we do our work, our personal work and therapy, we realize that the echoes from our childhood. I thought I wasn't marrying my mother. I thought I wasn't marrying my father. But I can see now some of those same things. And if you do a deep dive into your work, you kind of realize the healing that needs to happen for you to get out of that cycle. And it's really hard and really long term. Lastly, I want to talk about addiction in terms of risk-taking behaviors. I think, and I'll talk about the brain science behind why it can be addicting. I'm not just talking about drugs. I'm talking about anything dangerous, any risky behavior. We talk about it like you're doing this for comfort. You're doing this to escape pain, sadness, loneliness, hurt, whatever it is, right? We ascribe, we ask, we talk about in therapy, and we ascribe reasons why people do it. But when you become addicted to something, you do it when you're happy, you do it when you're sad, you do it to celebrate, you do it when you're lonely. It stops becoming anything anywhere close to a conscious choice. So when we become addicted, when it becomes a compulsive behavior, an unconscious behavior, that's another reason that we do it. Carl Jung said this. He said, neuroses is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, our neurotic behaviors, our mental health issues, while they may cause suffering and cause difficulty, you could easily identify in your child how their behaviors and their addictions causes problems. That'd be really easy to do. But this idea that it's always a substitute for legitimate suffering means it feels better than the authentic suffering. I'd rather deal with this feeling that comes from this behavior than to feel authentically what's going on for me. Similar to the system. So let's talk about some brain science behind this that really makes sense. Trauma or stress, which can come to you externally, means your parents could get a divorce, you could be abused, right? But it also speaks to the idea that when you do something risky or dangerous, your brain experiences trauma and stress, right? That only makes sense. Trauma or stress cause the brain to produce the neurochemicals cortisol and endorphins, regulated by the hypothalamus. When creating these chemicals repeatedly over time, the brain can become addicted to them. It requires more and more and more. to have that feeling of pleasure, that feeling of even homeostasis. This is why addicts or family members in an addicted family are often drawn to drama, intensity, stress, and fear. They cause the brain to generate these chemicals. Let's go a little bit deeper. Our brain's limbic system, that part of the brain that is the older part of the brain, the lower part of the brain, rewards us. The limbic system rewards us for behavior by releasing dopamine, a chemical that creates a sense of well-being or euphoria, creating a reinforcement for the behavior. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. The adolescent brain requires more stimulation than the adult brain to have this kind of reaction. That's very important. That's why, for example, the introduction of drugs into the adolescent brain is particularly dangerous. Various substances affect the limbic system in different ways, but substances associated with addiction cause the brain to release high levels of dopamine, up to 10 times normal, giving the user a sense of high. And of course, repeated and chronic use of this substance can cause the brain to stop producing dopamine. It makes sense. This creates withdrawal, dependency, and the addict needs more and more of it to get the desired goal. Due to this physical dependence, the abuser develops addiction. And remember, it could be gambling, right? It definitely is the introduction of a substance that increases the release of dopamine, but so do risk-taking behaviors. That's why we can have a process addiction, right? Where we can do things repeatedly because these same kind of chemicals are released. As a result, the abuser loses control consciously over the act of the risky behavior. If we think of addiction as a disease, it's really the brain's motivational center becoming reorganized, rewired. The priorities are shuffled. So these substances, this risk-taking behavior, this dangerous behavior becomes the priority. Even if rationally they know that it's harmful and risky, it becomes the priority. The drug, the behavior takes over the brain, and the addict doesn't experience it as a conscious choice anymore. There are obviously ways to intervene, and what we're doing at Evoke Wilderness Therapy is part of that. Any kind of therapy really is part of that, but that's the dynamic. So let's talk about what Dr. Siegel talks about. Like I said, 11 to 24, the brain is going through, and those numbers are different for everybody. That's a range, right? It's the time of the most development and change in our brain. We're accomplishing, like I said, the developmental task of moving away from our parents. This is from a book called Brainstorming by Daniel Siegel. We're exploring, feeling intensely, experimenting. Again, in his way of teaching and understanding the brain, he would say an adult could feel a sense of pleasure by reading a novel and curling up on a couch in front of the fire, and that would give them an intense sense of pleasure. It doesn't work so much for the adolescent brain. They need loud music, right? They need lots of stimulus. They need risk. Self-medicating is a way of kind of navigating this, kind of reinforcing this. So let's talk about several aspects of the adolescent brain that give us some insight into their tendency towards risky behavior. Novelty seeking emerges from an increased drive for the rewards in the circuits of the adolescent brain that create an inner motivation to try something new and feel it more fully, creating more engagement in life. And then he gives a downside and an upside for each concept. So with regard to novelty seeking, the downside is sensation seeking and risk taking that overemphasize the thrill and downplay the risk and dangerous behaviors and injury. Impulsivity can turn an idea into an action without a pause to reflect on the consequences. That might be the most resonating sentence about adolescence I've ever heard. But he also says there's an upside to all of this. We didn't have these brains. These brains didn't develop this way because they didn't help us. The upside is we're open to change, and living passionately emerges at this point. As the exploration of novelty is honed into a fascination for life and a drive to design new ways of doing things and living with a sense of adventure, right? It's the time we are to go out and explore and find ourselves, our passions, our careers, what we want to do. The second concept that he identifies being unique to the adolescent brain or qualitatively different from the adult brain: social engagement. Social engagement enhances peer connectedness and creates new friendships. The downside is teens isolate from adults and surround themselves with only teens that also have risk-taking behaviors. Oftentimes, there's a total rejection of the adults and the adult knowledge and reasoning, and this increases, of course, the risk. The upside is that there's a drive for social connection, leads to the creation of supportive relationships that are the research-proven best predictors of well-being, longevity, and happiness throughout the lifespan. Right? This is why it's there. We need community. Right? We can't raise ourselves, if you will, without a village. We need a village. I've always thought about this. Human beings are unimpressive on their own physically. But what makes us amazing, of course, is our brain compared to other species. But what we can do with language and connection and as a group, we're quite a dominant creature on the planet. The third concept, the third idea that differentiates the adolescent brain from the adult brain is an increased emotional intensity. It gives an enhanced vitality to life. The downside is intense emotion may rule the day, leading to impulsivity, moodiness, and extreme, sometimes unhelpful reactivity. The upside, life lived with emotional intensity can be filled with energy and a sense of vital drive that give an exuberance and a zest for being alive on the planet. And lastly, there's a creative exploration component to the adolescent brain that's different from the adult brain. Creative exploration with an expanded sense of consciousness, the adolescent's new thinking, qualitatively different thinking, and abstract reasoning allow questioning of the status quo, approaching problems with an out of the box. They're challenging us, they're challenging ideas. They're really breaking out of childhood and into adulthood. Innovation is the result, new ideas, creativity is the result. The downside, searching for the meaning of life during the teen years can lead to a crisis of sorts. Vulnerability to peer pressure and a lack of direction and purpose. The upside, if the mind can hold on to thinking and imagining and perceiving the world in new ways with consciousness, of creatively exploring the spectrum of experiences that are possible, the sense of being in a rut that can sometimes pervade adults in their lives can be minimized, and instead they can experience the joy of being, of the ordinary being extraordinary. Not a bad strategy, he says, for living life. So the idea here is that it's not all their fault. That doesn't mean that there's not choices. That doesn't mean that there needn't be boundaries and consequences. I'm not saying that, but it invites a kind of empathy. They're not, adolescents and especially children, they're not miniature adults. Right? One of my pet peeves in pop culture is this idea that we treat children like miniature adults, that you can't give people participation trophies. On the contrary, when you're trying to reinforce participation and risk-taking in a healthy way to a young child, you reward them for participating. And it doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. It can change over time. Salvador Minuchin, one of the founders of family therapy, said that health in a family is often defined by its ability to be flexible over time and according to each individual need in the family. So there's not one right way. And there's not one right way with each person that lasts forever. That's why this work that I do as a therapist and a father, for that matter, it is about asking parents to develop more resources, to expand themselves, to transform in this process. Because any child needs a lot, but children that struggle need more. It's not an indictment on any parent, including me. It's just a fact of nature. And to love a child who is a different kind of animal than us in this way that Dr. Siegel talks about, it requires expansion. What are the take homes from this? Um, it's hard. A child's risky behavior is maybe the hardest thing. So go easy on yourself. Go easy on them. What they need is oftentimes the hardest thing to give because they can't ask for it. And their behavior is designed, if you will, to send you running in a different direction, to send you to anger, to frustration, to fear. So that's why we do the work that we do here. This is why we'll struggle, right? Because it's hard, and that's why we're not always the best ones to provide all of this for our children. Sometimes it's a coach or a mentor or a therapist that can do a better job. That's true for your children, and that's true for my children. Really, the balance is about providing attachment, which is a safe container, a container that's curious, compassionate, seeks to understand, patient, loving, calm, versus an environment that is anxious, frustrated, scared, angry, disappointed, right? And at the same time, that comes as we develop a healthy self ourselves, right? That's the task. Attachment just comes out of that. And to develop a healthy self, we have to do our work. Kind of have to reparent ourselves. That's what I do in therapy every week for myself. I'm allowing myself to be reparented. I carry around a copy in my brain of my therapist. I think, how would she respond to me or this situation right now? And it's virtually always in that kind of calm, curious, compassionate way. And when I can regard myself that way, and then I know what others need too. That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from really anything I've read or studied. It comes from when I sit on the couch. We over-identify with our children. I was just talking about this in my therapy today, about some of the particular brand of mistakes that I have made with my children comes because I'm trying to fix something in me, in them, that's really broken in me. My parents were absent a lot growing up, so I was alone. And so I sometimes overfunction with my children because I don't want them to feel that aloneness, that there's not a backstop, that there's not a support. And that doesn't really have anything to do with my love for them. It has to do with from the unhealed wound of my own childhood. And that's my work. That's why I was talking to a therapist about it today. Now I'm talking to you about it today. Understanding and healing my attachment wounds is the thing. That's the number. I almost want to say it's the only thing that you can do to make a difference in your child's life. There are tools, choices, decisions, interventions that come out of that, of course. But for them to be effective and consistent, it's got to come out of healthy attachment in you, or repaired healthy attachment in you. So you provide that for others and you develop a self at the same time. Skills and tools, they can help, but they're not the thing. A hammer in the hand of a skilled carpenter is wonderful. A hammer in the hand of a 5-year-old is terrifying, right? So it's not the tool. They can help, but they're not the thing. That's why my version of parent education is not about telling you what to do so that it'll fix your child, more of how you develop a sense of self, out of which comes all of the future decisions, reactions, dynamics. And it's kind of yours to discover. Getting the support you need. I know of the shame of parents have of going to meetings and therapists. I know the shame that people have. I have some of that. Maybe it was just too much of a need of mine that I got over the therapy part. For those of you that aren't new, I've been with my current therapist for 20 years and had other therapists throughout my life. But it's just the human condition, right? If you don't think you need therapy, that's a sign that you probably need it more. And I've known lots and lots of therapists who won't do it, won't get it, don't think they need it, haven't been introduced to their own mental illness or mental health or wherever they are on that continuum. Children who struggle, like I said, they need more resources than typical children. That's what's being asked of you by their struggle, is to get something more. All right, I'll go through, if you're new, I'm just going to go through a few announcement slides, upcoming slides, and then I'll take questions. We want all parents to attend 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous. Let me be clear. Al-Anon, CODA, it's not about being in a relationship with somebody who's a drug addict or an alcoholic. It's about how to be in a relationship with another person. It's about how to be a person who happens to be struggling, right? Which means virtually everybody. So it's just about how to be a person and how to be in relationship with others. And the beauty of Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous and Families Anonymous is you learn really quick the problem isn't what you think the problem is. The problem in Al-Anon is not the alcoholic. The problem in Al-Anon is the person who's in love with them, the person who loves them. Right? That's the focus of it. And it makes all the difference in the world. Not by simple cause and effect, but it still makes it's the only chance you have, really. Also, I've added on here refuge recovery as an option, a Buddhist inspired. Don't need a higher power, but a support group for people who want to be in recovery. NAMI.org, a place you can go to learn about classes, resources in your area. Okay, the Evoke Family Foundation is available. You can find it on Facebook. They currently have a Crowdwise campaign where they're raising money. In 2018, they gave $73,000 in grants and helped 10 families, with 4 active right now. So if you want to give back, if you're at that place in your life, this is people who can't afford therapy, go there. On social media, all of these broadcasts are available on the podcast app on your iPhone or iOS device. Just search Evoke Therapy Programs after you go there and then subscribe. On your Android device, download the SoundCloud app and search Evoke Therapy Programs. Same thing, subscribe there. Or you can go to any computer and go to soundcloud.com and search Evoke Therapy Programs. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs, or you can find the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook by searching their name there. Our Evoke blog has new content available all the time. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. We ask all current families to go to a multi-family experiential workshop. You can combine this with a visit to your child if the therapist thinks it's appropriate. The next one is just in a couple of days, January 12th. So if you're not signed up for that, you're probably not going, although there would probably still be space for you. And then the one following that will be on February 16th and 17th. Contact Melanie at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to do a deep dive into your work, come to our Finding You. This is one of my passions. It makes the biggest difference. The next one with an opening, because the January 20th one is full, the next one that has an opening will be February 20th through 24th. I'll list on the next broadcast all the upcoming for the next several months. Contact us at intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. See you in the New York area. Hope to see you there on Monday night. I'll be doing a parent support group this Monday, January 14th, 7 to 9 p.m. Again, contact Melanie at evoketherapy.com to RSVP for more information. You can also bring a friend, or if you know somebody who's struggling in the area, they're welcome to come. It's an evening of support, community, and with some teaching. Our pursuits trips are for families and young adults. Think sober fun, therapy light, therapy recalibration kind of reminder. All right. Any questions come in? Can't decide if that's really good that there are none, or maybe I didn't do my job. At any rate, you can always send in questions and contact us at intensives@evoketherapy.com. I hope this was a helpful point of contact. Thank you for and on behalf of your children for showing up, for being curious to look at yourself, your part in the dance. If you're new or non-Evoke family, thank you for joining us tonight. Please subscribe to our podcast. I love doing this. The next one will be next Wednesday, January 16th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and I'll be talking about couples work and how that relates to a struggling child. So thanks for joining us this evening. Have a great weekend. See some of you in New York on Monday. Take care and bye-bye.